The great chamber of the Galactic Council was built to make visitors feel small. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. 12 massive seats surrounded a single platform in the center, each seat holding a representative from the most powerful species in the galaxy. The seats were raised high above the platform, forcing anyone who stood there to look up like a child begging for attention. Ambassador Park Gina stood on that platform now. She wore a traditional Korean dress, deep blue with silver patterns that caught the strange alien lights. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple style. Her face showed nothing, no fear, no anger, no hope. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in this place was weakness. Around her, representatives watched with various forms of amusement. The Kirashi delegate, High Arbiter Velanax, sat directly in front of her. His body was like a giant insect, with hard shell covering his form and mandibles that clicked when he spoke. His compound eyes reflected Gina's image 1,000 times over. The human petition for expansion into the Tau Ceti system is denied, Velanax announced. His voice was translated by the chamber's systems, but the contempt needed no translation. Humanity has not demonstrated sufficient maturity for such responsibility. Laughter filled the chamber. Each species laughed differently. The Kirashi clicked. The Malthari hissed. The Velthrani made wet gurgling sounds. But they all meant the same thing. The Malthari delegate leaned forward. Her scales shimmered between green and gold as she moved. Perhaps when your species learns to crawl properly, we will discuss walking. Our laughter. Come back in another century. Maybe two? Gina kept her face empty. Inside, something cold and patient took note of every sound, every gesture, every insult. She had been trained for this. All human ambassadors were trained for this. Not to endure the humiliation, but to remember it. The council has spoken, Velanax declared. This session is concluded. Gina bowed once, deeply and formally. The aliens saw submission. They did not understand what the bow really meant. In 300 years of dealing with humans, they had never bothered to learn. She walked out of the chamber with measured steps. Behind her, the delegates were already discussing other matters. Earth forgotten like an unimportant footnote back on Earth. In a room buried deep beneath the mountains of Korea, Defense Minister Cho Tai-woo watched the broadcast. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Beside him stood Admiral Yoon Hana, a woman whose silver hair and small frame hid a mind that had planned wars across star systems. The broadcast ended. Silence filled the room. 300 years, Cho said quietly. 300 years of this, Hana nodded. They have become comfortable. They think they know us. The history between Earth and the galaxy was simple and painful. When humanity first reached the stars, they found a universe already claimed. The great powers had divided everything among themselves long ago. They offered humanity a choice: sign the treaties and accept restrictions, or be destroyed. Earth signed. They had no choice. Their ships were primitive. Their weapons were toys compared to alien technology. So they accepted the restriction accords, which limited their fleet to 40 vessels. They accepted the technology embargo, which forbade them from developing advanced weapons. They paid tribute in minerals, in water, in people, yes, in people. The cultural exchange program sent thousands of humans to alien worlds each year. They were called workers and students. Everyone knew what they really were. For 300 years, Earth had obeyed. They sent their tributes. They kept their fleet small. They bowed and scraped and apologized for existing, and they waited. Do you remember why we signed those treaties? Cho asked. Hannah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because we were weak. Because we needed time. Time for what? Time to stop being weak. Cho turned away from the screen. Through the reinforced windows of the underground base, he could see the construction halls stretching into the distance. Massive shapes moved in the darkness, shapes that had never appeared on any report sent to the council. Wake the shipyards, he said. All of them. The hidden ones, too. And the treaties. The treaties were signed by desperate people who had no choice. We are not those people anymore. Hannah pulled out a communication device and spoke quietly into it. Across the solar system, in bases hidden beneath moons and inside asteroids, and in the empty spaces between planets, lights began to turn on. Machines that had been sleeping for decades woke up. Workers who had trained their entire lives for this moment received the signal they had been waiting for in the Galactic Council. The delegates finished their discussions and returned to their pleasures. Velenax attended a celebration where he told the story of the human ambassador's pathetic bow. The Malthri delegate sent a report to her government, describing Earth as adequately controlled. The other species did not think about humanity at all. None of them. Notice the messages traveling through space, encrypted in ways their technology could not detect. None of them saw the movement in the dark corners of human space. None of them understood that they had just made the last mistake they would ever make as rulers of the galaxy. On the station, Ambassador Park Gina returned to her quarters. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the stars. Her communication device showed a single message, just 3 words: "It has begun." She sipped her tea slowly. Tomorrow, she would attend another council session. She would stand on that platform again, looking up at the elevated seats. She would bow and accept whatever insults they offered, but not for much longer. Outside her window, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere out there, humanity was finally waking up. And when morning came for the galaxy, it would find that everything had changed. Gina finished her tea and prepared for sleep. She would need her strength for what was coming. They all would. The Pacific Ocean covered almost half of Earth's surface. Beneath its waves, in trenches so deep that sunlight never reached them, humanity had built its secrets. Dr. Bei Sunwoo traveled down in an elevator that took 40 minutes to reach the bottom. The pressure outside would crush any normal structure instantly. But the walls around him were made of materials that alien scientists did not know existed. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped into a city. Shipyard 7 stretched 4 kilometers in every direction. Workers moved between massive construction frames where ships took shape like growing creatures. These were not the small, weak vessels that humanity showed to the galaxy. These were warships built for one purpose: to end wars before they began. Sunwoo had spent his entire career here. He had been born in a surface city, but his real life had started when he was recruited at age 20. Now, at 63, he was about to see his life's work finally used. A young engineer named Odami met him at the entrance to the command center. "The War Council is ready for you, Doctor." "How many are coming online?" "All of them. Every shipyard, every weapons platform, every defense system. We have never activated everything at once before." Sunwoo nodded. "We never needed to before." The command center was a circular room filled with holographic displays. President Kong Do-ha sat at the head of the table, her face calm but her eyes intense. Admiral Yun Hana stood beside a massive display showing the solar system. Defense Minister Cho Tai-woo was speaking quietly with a group of military commanders. When Sunwoo entered, everyone turned to look at him. Dr. President Kong said, "Please begin." Sunwoo walked to the central display and activated it with a gesture. The hologram changed to show Earth's true military strength. Numbers appeared beside symbols representing ships, stations, and weapons platforms. 312 capital ships, he announced. Each one equivalent to approximately 15 Qurayshi warships in combat power. Over 2,000 support vessels, weapons ranging from Class 7 to Class 12. One of the younger commanders spoke up. "I thought Class 10 was the maximum theoretical limit for energy weapons." "It was." "We moved the limit." Admiral Hannah brought up another display. "The galaxy believes we have 40 patrol ships and no weapons beyond Class 3 for 300 years. We have let them believe this. Every ship they saw, every weapon they scanned, every piece of technology they examined was carefully designed to seem primitive. We have been hiding," President Kong said. "The question before us now is simple. Do we stop hiding?" Defense Minister Cho stepped forward. "With respect, Madam President, the question is not whether we stop hiding. The Council made that decision for us when they denied our petition today. The question is, how we reveal ourselves. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what this moment meant. For 300 years, humanity had played a role. They had pretended to be weak, to be inferior, to be grateful for the scraps the galaxy threw them. Now that role was ending. We have three options, Cho continued. First, we can reveal our strength gradually, using it to negotiate better treaty terms. Second, we can make a dramatic demonstration that forces the galaxy to recognize us as equals immediately. Third, we can remain hidden and continue as we have been. The third option is no longer possible, Hannah said flatly. The Council made that clear today. They will never see us as equals while they believe they can crush us whenever they choose. Then we choose between slow revelation and fast revelation. Kong stood and walked to the window that looked out over the shipyard. Massive vessels hung in construction frames, their hulls gleaming with power. She had spent her entire political career preparing for this moment. Her predecessor had prepared, and his predecessor, and his. 7 generations of leaders all building toward this single point in history. I spoke with my grandmother before she died, Kong said softly. She was a child when the first treaties were signed. She remembered the shame of it. She told me that someday, humanity would stand up straight again. She asked me to make sure I was there when it happened. She turned to face the Council. Send a message to every species that signed a treaty with Earth. 1 word on each document. What word? Madam President. Void. The decision was made. Within hours, copies of every treaty humanity had ever signed were transmitted across the galaxy. Each one bore a single stamp in every known language, VOID, on the Galactic Council station. Ambassador Park Gina was in her quarters when her door was broken down by Kirishi security forces. They pointed weapons at her and demanded she surrender. She put down her teacup calmly. I assume you have seen the messages. You are under arrest for crimes against galactic order. Gina smiled. I would suggest you release me. Not for my sake. For yours? The guards laughed, their mandibles clicking with amusement. They did not understand why she was smiling. They did not understand that she was not trapped with them. They were trapped with her. Across human space. Engines that had never fired came to life. Weapons that had never been tested in real combat powered up. Crews that had trained in secret for decades reported to their stations. The largest military force the galaxy had ever seen prepared to move. And in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, the representatives were receiving the voided treaties with confusion and amusement. Let them posture, Velenax declared. What can 40 ships do against us? He would learn the answer soon enough. The first attack came without warning. The Kirishi. Dominion controlled 17 star systems along their border with human space. The outer colonies were mining operations mostly, pulling valuable metals from asteroids and moons. Each colony was protected by defensive platforms and patrol ships. Each one had stood for centuries, untouchable symbols of Kirishi power. On what would later be called the First Night, all 17 colonies went dark. Commander Kim Yeho led the assault on the largest colony, a moon called Varith IV with a population of 200,000 Kirishi workers. His ship, the ESV Quiet Storm, dropped out of faster-than-light travel less than a kilometer from the main defensive platform. By the time the platform sensors registered the human ship, it was already too late. Weapons that the Kirishi did not know existed fired once. The platform stopped existing. All teams begin, Yeho ordered. 12 more human ships appeared around the moon. They did not fire on the population centers. Instead, they targeted military installations with surgical precision. Defense batteries vanished. Communication towers fell silent. Patrol ships were disabled before their crews could even reach their stations. The entire operation took 11 minutes. When the Dominion sent ships to investigate 3 days later, they found the colony intact. The people were alive. The homes were undamaged. But every piece of military technology had been erased so completely that it was like they had never existed. The same story repeated across all 17 colonies. And then it started happening elsewhere. High Arbiter, Velenax, called an emergency session of the Council. His mandibles clicked frantically as he addressed the other delegates. This is an act of war. Humanity must be punished. With what forces? The Maltheri delegate asked. Her scales had turned pale, a sign of fear among her people. We have lost contact with 6 of our military stations. Our border fleet is not responding. The Velthrani shipyards are gone, another delegate reported. Not destroyed, dismantled. Our workers woke up this morning and found themselves standing in empty fields. Where our greatest construction facilities used to be, Velenax slammed his armored limb against his seat. How is this possible? They had 40 ships. In her holding cell on the station, Ambassador Park Gina heard the emergency alarms through the walls. A guard came to her door, his weapon shaking in his grip. What have you done? He demanded. Gina remained seated on her small bed. I have done nothing. I have been in this cell the entire time. Your people are attacking across the galaxy. Are they? She tilted her head slightly. Interesting. I wonder what could have provoked such behavior. The guard raised his weapon. Gina did not flinch. You should know, she said calmly, that there is a human ship currently positioned directly above this station. Its weapons are aimed at this cell block. If anything happens to me, this entire section will be gone before you can blink. The guard's scales went pale. He lowered his weapon and left without another word. Captain Lee Minho commanded the ship hovering over the station. The ESV Silent Dawn was one of the newer vessels, built specifically for operations that required precision and patience. Minho himself was a quiet man who rarely raised his voice. He did not need to. Status report, he said. His tactical officer, a young woman named Beek Somi, studied her displays. The station's defenses are active, but not targeting us. They know we are here, but they do not know what to do about it. And the ambassador? Alive? Unharmed. They have removed her guards from the cell block. Minho nodded. Good. They are learning. Across the galaxy, humanity was teaching a lesson that would not be forgotten. But they were not teaching it with cruelty. Every attack followed the same pattern. Military targets only, no civilian casualties, and no permanent occupation. This confused the aliens more than anything else. The Malthri High Command gathered 200 warships for a counterattack. They chose a human colony on the edge of settled space, planning to make an example of it. The fleet arrived in perfect formation, weapons charged, crews ready for battle. They found 12 human ships waiting for them. The Maltheri commander laughed when he saw the numbers. 200 against 12. This would be a massacre. He was right about the massacre. He was wrong about which side would be massacred. The battle lasted for minutes. When it was over, 200 Maltheri warships were floating debris. 12 human ships were completely undamaged. Captain Lee Minho received the report on his bridge. Casualties. None, sir. On our side, at least. And theirs. Somi checked the data. Most escape pods were launched before their ships were destroyed. We are detecting approximately 18,000 survivors. Good, send rescue coordinates to the nearest Maltheri station. We are not here to kill. We are here to prove a point. This was the pattern that emerged over the following weeks. Human ships appeared without warning, struck with devastating efficiency, and then vanished. They destroyed weapons and ships, but went out of their way to preserve lives. They left populations helpless but unharmed. The message was clear. We could destroy you if we wanted to. We are choosing not to. In the Galactic Council chamber, the remaining delegates gathered in something close to panic. Half of their member species had already lost their military capabilities. The other half knew they were next. Velenax tried to maintain order, but his authority was crumbling. We must unite. We must combine our remaining forces. For what purpose? A delegate asked. They have weapons we cannot match. Ships we cannot detect. Technology we do not understand. What good will combining our forces do? No one had an answer. And somewhere in the darkness of space, humanity was just getting started. The galaxy expected a war. They prepared for long campaigns, bloody battles, grinding attrition that would last for decades. They studied human history and saw a species that had fought countless wars among themselves. Surely, they thought, this war would follow the same pattern. They were wrong. What humanity brought was not war. It was something the galaxy had never seen before. Absolute military dominance combined with complete restraint. Human ships did not conquer. They did not occupy. They did not enslave or exterminate. They simply appeared, demonstrated their power, and left. Commander Shinyori led the operation against the Kirashi homeworld. Her fleet of 50 vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the heart of their most protected space. Defensive platforms that had stood for millennia opened fire immediately. Their weapons bounced off. Human shields like rain against stone. Hold fire, Yuri ordered. We are not here to destroy. Her fleet descended through the atmosphere of the Kirashi homeworld, past layer after layer of defenses that had been disabled hours earlier by advanced teams. They hovered over the capital city, their shadows blocking out the alien sun, and then they waited. For 6 hours, they simply stayed there. The city below went into panic at first. People ran through the streets, expecting death from above. Military forces tried to organize resistance, but their weapons would not fire. Communication systems would not work. Everything that could be used to fight had been quietly shut down. When no attack came, the panic slowly turned to confusion. Why were the humans just waiting? What did they want? The Kirashi leadership finally emerged from their underground bunkers. High Arbiter, Velanax himself, walked out onto the steps of the central government building. Looking up at the massive ships that hung over his world like judgment from angry gods, a small transport detached from Yuri's flagship and descended. She stepped out alone, wearing a simple uniform with no decorations or medals. She walked toward Velanax without fear. You have come to accept our surrender, Velanax asked, his voice cracking. No, Yuri replied. There will be no surrender because there is no war. Then what is this? Yuri looked around at the city, at the billions of Kirashi who were watching from windows and screens across the planet. This is a demonstration. For 300 years, you treated humanity like insects. You took our people for your work camps. You stole our resources. You laughed at us in your great council chamber. She stepped closer to Velanax. He flinched backward. We could destroy your entire civilization before your sun sets today. We could end your species with a single command. Every ship you have ever built, every weapon you have ever made, every soldier you have ever trained means nothing against us. Then why do you not do it? Yuri shook her head slowly. Because that is not who we are. We are not conquerors. We are not tyrants. We simply want you to understand one thing. What? You were never our masters. You were never even our equals. She turned and walked back to her transport. Before she boarded, she looked back one more time. Think about that. Think about what it means. And when you are ready to talk to us as equals, we will be waiting. The fleet rose back into space and vanished, leaving the Kirashi homeworld untouched but forever changed. On Earth. Professor No Yunji watched the broadcasts with her students at Seoul National University. The classroom was quiet as images played across the screens, human ships hovering over alien capitals. Military forces dissolved overnight, entire civilizations brought to their knees without a single civilian death. One of her students, a young man named Han Jung-woo, raised his hand. Professor, I do not understand. We could rule the entire galaxy now. Why are we not taking control? Yunji smiled sadly. That is the question, is it not? For 300 years, those species controlled us because they could. They believed that power gave them the right to dominate others. If we did the same thing now, how would we be any different from them? But they were cruel to us. Yes, and that cruelty does not give us permission to be cruel in return. It only shows us what we should not become. Another student spoke up. So what do we want? Yunji turned to look out the window. The sky was blue and peaceful. Somewhere up there, human ships were rewriting the rules of galactic civilization. We want them to understand that they were wrong about us. Not because we want revenge, but because we want a future where no species is treated the way we were treated. We want equality. Real equality. And we are showing them that equality is their only option. Across the galaxy, the message was spreading. Species that had laughed at humanity were now watching their most powerful members brought low. The Moltheri had lost every ship they possessed. The Valthrani had lost their shipyards and their economy. The Orvani trade syndicate had watched centuries of accumulated wealth disappear overnight. When human technicians erased their financial networks, but nowhere did human forces stay. Nowhere did they plant flags or claim territory. They struck, they demonstrated their power, and they left. It was the strangest war in galactic history because it was not a war at all. It was a lesson. And slowly, painfully, the galaxy was beginning to learn it. In his ruined command center, Velenax sat alone. His government was in chaos. His military was destroyed. His people were terrified. And for the first time in his long life, he understood something he had never understood before. He had been wrong about humanity. They had all been wrong, and now they would have to live with the consequences of that mistake. 6 months after humanity voided its treaties, the Galactic Council convened for what everyone knew would be the most important session in its history. The Great Chamber looked different now. Half the elevated seats were empty, their species having collapsed into internal chaos or simply refused to participate in a system that had failed so completely. The remaining delegates sat in their places. But no one looked down at the central platform anymore. No one clicked with amusement or hissed with contempt. They sat in silence, waiting for the humans to arrive. Ambassador Park Gina walked into the chamber alone. She wore the same traditional dress she had worn 6 months ago, the same calm expression on her face. But everything around her had changed. The guards who had once treated her with contempt now stepped aside with respect bordering on fear. She took her place on the central platform and looked round at the assembled delegates. Her eyes found Velenax, who sat smaller in his seat than before, his shell dull and his mandibles still. "I am here to present humanity's terms for rejoining galactic civilization," she announced. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. The delegates leaned forward. Some were desperate, having lost everything in the past months. Others were calculating, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage of the old order. All of them understood that their futures depended on what happened in this room. "First," Gina said, "all existing treaties are void. They will be renegotiated on equal terms. Every restriction that applies to humanity will apply to all species equally. No exceptions." Heads nodded around the chamber. Of course, anything. Second, all humans currently held on alien worlds under the Cultural Exchange Program will be returned immediately. Their families will be compensated for 3 centuries of forced labor. The amount will be calculated fairly and must be paid within 5 years. More nods, faster now. Third, the Galactic Council will be restructured completely. No species will hold permanent authority over others. The High Arbiter position is abolished. All disputes will be resolved through fair arbitration, with rotating judges from different species. Velenax shifted in his seat but said nothing. Fourth, all member species will share technology freely. The embargoes and restrictions that kept less powerful species dependent on others are finished. Knowledge belongs to everyone. The chamber was silent. These terms were harsh but fair. The delegates had expected much worse. They had expected conquest, occupation, perhaps even extinction. Is there a 5th term? The Moltheri delegate asked, her voice small and afraid. Gina paused. She looked around the chamber at the beings who had mocked her, insulted her, treated her people like animals for 300 years. "No," she said. "There is no 5th term." The delegates exhaled with relief. "We are not here to punish you," Gina continued. "We never were. We simply want what every species wants, to live in peace, to be respected, to have a voice that matters. You denied us these things because you could. Now you cannot. That is the only difference." She bowed once, the same formal bow she had given 6 months ago. This time, the delegates understood what it meant. It was not submission. It had never been submission. It was respect offered to those who earned it, and a warning to those who might forget. The terms were accepted unanimously. Over the following months, the galaxy began to rebuild itself on new foundations. Human ships patrolled trade routes, not as conquerors but as peacekeepers. Human diplomats sat on arbitration panels, helping resolve disputes that had festered for centuries. Human technology flowed freely to species that had been kept primitive by the old powers. It was not a human empire. It was something new. A galaxy where power was balanced, where no species could dominate others, where the strong protected the weak instead of exploiting them. On Earth, the celebrations were quiet. There were no parades or monuments. People simply went back to their lives knowing that the universe was finally safe for them. Admiral Yoon Hannah retired to a small house on the Korean coast, not far from where she had grown up. She spent her days fishing in the ocean and her evenings reading old books about Earth's history. The wars and empires of the past seemed distant now, lessons learned long ago and finally put into practice. One evening, her granddaughter came to visit. The girl was 12 years old, born after the treaties were voided. Growing up in a galaxy that would never know her people as slaves, they sat together on the porch. Watching the sun set over the water, "Grandmother," the girl asked, "why did humanity hide for so long? You were always stronger. You could have fought back from the beginning." Hannah smiled and cast her fishing line into the golden waves. "There is an old saying," she replied. "The nail that sticks up gets hammered down." When we first met the galaxy, we were just one small species surrounded by giants. If we had shown our strength, they would have crushed us before we could grow. So you pretended to be weak? We pretended to be harmless. There is a difference. Weak things get destroyed. Harmless things get ignored. We let them ignore us while we built our strength in secret. The girl thought about this. But how did you know when to stop hiding? Hannah watched her line move gently with the current. We knew when hiding became more costly than fighting, when the insults became unbearable, when we realized that no amount of patience would change how they saw us. And now they see us clearly. Now they understand what we always were. What were we? Hannah turned to look at her granddaughter. In the girl's eyes, she saw the future generations of humans who would grow up free, respected, equal members of a galaxy that had once tried to break them. "We were never the nail," she said softly. "We were never the victims they thought we were. We were always the hammer, waiting for the right moment to fall." The sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Somewhere among the stars, human ships kept watch over a peaceful galaxy, and on a quiet porch on the Korean coast, an old woman and a young girl watched the darkness come, knowing that no matter how black the night became, the dawn would always follow. Humanity had waited 300 years for this moment. They could wait a little longer to enjoy it.